Are you ready to learn the truth about how a real Native American camp functioned hundreds of years ago? Many historical myths distort the picture of the harsh but incredibly well thought out life of the tribes of the Great Plains. I will tell you about the daily routine of the Lakota people, where every action had a strict practical purpose. Step by step, we will follow the entire cycle from setting up the first morning poles to building the evening fire. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how they preserve their supplies in conditions of extreme temperature fluctuations. What if I told you that the location of each shelter was subject to a strict wind protection system? The Lakota camp was always built in the shape of a perfect circle, with the open part facing east. The first rays of the morning sun immediately hit the entrances, quickly warming the rooms that had cooled down overnight. Each individual structure consisted of a frame that required about 15 long wooden poles. These poles were carefully stripped of bark and dried in the sun to prevent the wood from rotting. The covering for such a frame was sewn from thick, heavy material, which was stretched over the wooden base. The lower edge of this covering was pressed tightly to the ground with heavy stones or wooden stakes. This prevented cold air from entering during strong step winds. A special opening was always left at the top of the structure for smoke to escape from the internal hearth. Two additional external poles allowed the position of the smoke vents to be adjusted depending on the direction of the wind. Then it was time to replenish the supply of clean drinking water from the nearest stream or river. The water was carried in special sealed containers made of dense organic materials. These containers had a narrow neck, which prevented the precious liquid from spilling during long walks. The women carefully descended to the water, trying not to disturb the water near the shore with their footsteps. The full container was very heavy, so it was carried on the back with a wide strap. At the same time, they began to check all the external fastenings after the night's gusts of wind. The damp leather straps that tied the poles together had a tendency to stretch under the influence of the morning dew. They had to be tightened and retied with complex, secure knots. This was the only way to ensure the stability of the entire structure throughout the long day ahead. Every detail of the frame was carefully inspected for cracks or other possible damage. Inside the dwelling, the sleeping areas were cleaned and the space was prepared for work. The beds consisted of a thick layer of dry grass, on top of which thick, tanned coverings were spread. During the day, these coverings were neatly rolled up and folded against the walls, freeing up the central area. The earthen floor was regularly swept with bundles of stiff branches to maintain basic cleanliness. Personal belongings were placed along the walls, packed in stiff envelopes made of thick material. This strict organization of space helped to avoid chaos, even in the most compact room. There was always room in the center to move safely around the burning or smoldering hearth. The smoke rose straight up, not lingering at eye level or interfering with breathing. Meanwhile, the outer circle of the camp began to fill with the sounds of everyday work. People came out of their shelters to start making tools and repairing equipment. The sun rose higher, and the dew on the tall steppe grass began to evaporate quickly. This was the signal for the start of large-scale work to harvest plant resources in the surrounding area. Groups of gatherers set off for the lowlands, where moisture remained the longest. They carried special tools with pointed ends for digging up deep roots. They navigated the terrain using the sun and the characteristic curves of distant hills. The entire camp functioned as a single, well-coordinated mechanism where everyone had their own role. The absence of fuss and a clear understanding of the tasks ensured high efficiency in all work. Even the simple task of weaving rope required concentration and adherence to the correct sequence of actions. I want to emphasize that discipline was the main key to survival in such a harsh climate. Without it, it would have been impossible to prepare for the coming cold seasons. The layout and geometry of this settlement are a striking example of the engineering calculations of the past. Every decision here was dictated by the need for maximum protection from the harsh environment. The wind, sun, and terrain were used by people for their benefit, not to their detriment. This approach to architecture deserves the closest study and deep respect. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion on such a strict settlement layout. Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. I discovered this by accident, but the orientation methods of the indigenous people surpassed all modern navigation devices. The endless expanses of the Great Plains seem completely flat, and devoid of obvious landmarks to an outsider. However, for the Lakota, every small depression or bend in the bed of a dry creek served as an accurate map. They knew how to determine the cardinal directions by the slope of certain types of prairie grasses. The direction of the prevailing winds formed a unique pattern of vegetation that an experienced tracker could read with ease. Particular attention was paid to the search for wild turnips, which were called tinsila. This plant was hidden deep underground, leaving only small, inconspicuous leaves on the surface. The gatherers used long sticks made of hard wood with ends burned for strength. With this tool, they carefully loosened the dry soil around the root, trying not to damage it. The extracted tuber was cleaned of dirt and placed in a spacious wicker basket. In addition to roots, the slopes of ravines were actively searched for wild berries and shrub fruits. Gathering wild plums and cherries required great care because of the sharp thorns on the branches. Special thick pads made of dried organic material were used to protect the hands. The harvested berries could not be stored fresh for long under the scorching sun. Therefore, they were immediately spread out on flat stones for preliminary drying. An important stage was the collection of medicinal plants that grew only in certain lowlands. The herbs were carefully cut with sharp stone blades at the very base of the stem. They were tied into small bundles and hung on a belt to dry while walking. Each plant had its own specific purpose and was collected at a specific time of year. This knowledge was passed down by word of mouth and was the most important asset of the entire settlement. The weather on the plains could change in a matter of minutes, from scorching heat to squally winds. Therefore, the gatherers always kept a close eye on the shape of the clouds on the horizon. At the slightest sign of an approaching storm, the group immediately stopped work and headed for shelter. The ability to predict the weather based on the behavior of the wind saved lives in this open terrain. The absence of natural barriers made people extremely vulnerable to the elements. By noon, the sun reached its zenith, and the heat became almost unbearable for hard work. At this time, a short rest was taken in the shade of sparse trees near dried-up ponds. People drank water from their supplies and ate a small amount of dried food. This rest was necessary to regain strength before the return trip to the settlement. The heavy load made the return journey much slower and more exhausting. Upon returning to camp, the entire harvest was immediately distributed for further processing. The roots of wild turnips were laid out on special wooden platforms under the scorching sun. They had to be thoroughly dried so that they could be stored for the long winter months. Each family had its own racks set up on high supports. This height provided excellent ventilation and protected the supplies from rotting due to moisture from the ground. This whole process required incredible endurance and a thorough knowledge of the territory. A mistake in navigation or the wrong choice of harvesting time could lead to a shortage of food in winter. This work was the basis of the well-being of the entire Lakota camp. Do you think modern humans could be as sensitive to changes in nature? In the next chapter, you will learn how they managed to harvest and preserve food supplies for many months ahead. The secret, passed down from generation to generation, lies in the methods of drying and preparing supplies. I am talking about a unique technology for creating a product that can be stored for years without refrigeration. This product, called pemmican, was an ideal concentrate of energy and nutrients. The process of making it began with the careful drying of thinly sliced strips of protein-rich food. These strips were hung on tall wooden frames, where they were blown by the dry steppe wind. Once completely dry, the material became incredibly hard and brittle, like a piece of wood. It was placed on a flat stone boulder and methodically crushed with heavy stone hammers. The goal was to turn these hard pieces into a uniform fine powder. This process required tremendous physical effort and took several hours of continuous work. The shelf life and taste of the future product directly depended on the quality of the grinding. For long-term storage, the finished pemmican was packed in special containers called parfleche. Parfleche was made from very stiff, dried organic material resembling thick cardboard. It was folded into the shape of a flat envelope and tightly bound with strong straps. This packaging was completely waterproof and reliably protected the contents from moisture and dust. The outside of the parfleche was often decorated with intricate geometric patterns, painted with natural dyes. The process of preserving wild turnips also had its own strict technological features. The peeled tubers were cut into thin rings or long strips using sharp stone knives. They were woven into long braids which were hung from the ceiling of the dwelling. There, in the warmth and light smoke from the hearth, the turnips dried completely, acquiring a smoky aroma. In winter, these dry pieces were simply thrown into boiling water, where they quickly swelled. Preserving supplies was a matter of life and death for the entire Lakota settlement. Nomads could not afford to depend on the whims of nature during the cold months. Every member of the camp was involved in this endless process of preparation and harvesting. They created a system that functioned flawlessly and provided them with everything they needed. Unique drying and packaging methods made them completely self-sufficient in the vast plains. This autonomy allowed them to move freely over vast distances without being tied to one place. Supplies in lightweight parfleche envelopes were easy to transport and did not take up much space during migration. If necessary, parfleche could be hidden in a cache to be retrieved later. These caches were carefully camouflaged among rocks or in dry caves known only to members of the community. Knowledge of the location of such caches was passed on only to the most trusted individuals. The experience of our ancestors, embedded in these recipes, proved to be a perfect tool for adaptation. Today, these technologies are studied by specialists in survival in extreme conditions. The simplicity and effectiveness of these methods remain relevant even centuries later. I am sure that this information will make you look at the history of everyday life in the past in a new way. Like this video if you are also impressed by such an incredibly well-thought-out food storage system. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how the sharpest tools were made without the use of metal? The craft of stone working, known as flint knapping, required perfect eye and a steady hand. The craftsman would sit on the ground, placing a piece of thick material on his knees to protect his legs. A high-quality piece of flint or obsidian found in a riverbed was selected as the blank. Using a heavy round stone, the craftsman made precise strikes on the edges of the blank, chipping off large flakes. The next step was to finely hone the blade to perfect sharpness. For this, a special tool made from a piece of hard bone or horn was used. The craftsman pressed the sharp end of the bone forcefully against the edge of the stone, chipping off microscopic fragments. This created a serrated, incredibly sharp edge capable of cutting through the densest material. One wrong move or incorrectly calculated force could destroy the blank, and the work would have to be started all over again. Bone awls, necessary for sewing thick materials, occupied a special place in the arsenal. The sharp bone was ground on a stone for a long time until a perfectly smooth surface and a needle-like tip were obtained. A small indentation was made at the blunt end of the awl to provide a handrest when piercing thick leather. This simple tool was absolutely indispensable in the manufacture of winter clothing and coverings for dwellings. Craftsmen took good care of their awls, keeping them in special protective cases on their belts. Woodworking tools consisted of massive stone axes and adzes. The stone blade was firmly attached to a wooden handle with thick strips of rawhide. The leather was wound while wet and shrunk as it dried, forming a monolithic joint. Such a tool could be used to chop thick branches and even fell small trees for the frame of a dwelling. A dull axe was sharpened by rubbing it against a large flat boulder with the addition of river sand and water. The entire life of the camp depended on the quality of these handmade items. Each adult member of the community had their own set of personal tools, which they constantly kept in working order. The process of creating new tools never stopped, filling all free time between other tasks. In the evenings by the fire, you could always hear the characteristic sound of stone striking stone or bone grinding. It was a continuous cycle of renewal and repair of vital equipment. Many of these skills required years of practice and a deep understanding of the properties of materials. The master knew how stone would behave when split and how wood would react to heat. This knowledge was not written down, but was passed on exclusively through observation and collaborative work. Young people spent hours watching their elders work, trying to replicate their precise, measured movements. This is how technological continuity was preserved within the entire Lakota tribe. Each strike of the flint was a step toward ensuring the safety of the entire settlement. Without these sharp blades and sturdy hammers, it would have been impossible to build shelters or prepare food. Have you ever used tools made entirely by hand from natural materials? In the next chapter, you will learn how they kept fires going and cooked hot food without the metal utensils we are accustomed to. Cooking hot food without heat-resistant metal utensils required incredible ingenuity. The basis of cooking was a method of boiling using hot stones placed directly in the liquid. Hollows in the ground lined with dense waterproof material were used as cooking vessels. Large wooden bowls hollowed out from a single piece of wood using fire and stone chisels were also used. These containers were filled with clean water from a stream, after which the heating process began. Constantly changing the stones allowed the water to boil steadily for a long time. Pre-chopped roots and dry supplies were placed in this improvised cauldron. Wood ash, which inevitably fell into the water along with the stones, served as a kind of spice rich in minerals. Thick steam rose from the cauldron to the opening at the top of the dwelling, filling the space with the aromas of the food being prepared. The cook constantly stirred the mixture with a long wooden spatula, making sure that the ingredients did not stick to the stones. This method was very resource-intensive and required a person to be constantly present at the hearth. It was necessary to continuously monitor the temperature of the stones in the fire and replace them in time. In addition, it was necessary to constantly add wood to maintain the required level of heat. After cooking, the stones were thoroughly washed and set aside for future use. Due to frequent temperature changes, they eventually cracked and crumbled, requiring new boulders to be found. Spices, as we understand them today, were practically not used in the daily diet of the Lakota. Wild herbs, wild onions, and berries added during cooking gave the food its flavor. Salt was obtained from salt marshes or from the ashes of certain types of steppe plants. The diet was completely dependent on the seasons and the success of the harvest on the plains. The summer menu was richer in fresh plants, while the winter menu consisted exclusively of dried provisions. Dishes were cleaned after meals using bundles of stiff grass and river sand. Wooden bowls were carefully scraped, washed with water, and left to dry away from open flames. Keeping dishes clean was critical to preventing stomach diseases. Drinking water was stored separately in special wineskins hung in a cool place. It was treated with great care, trying not to waste a single drop. The hearth inside the dwelling was never completely extinguished, leaving a thick layer of ash on top of the smoldering coals. This allowed the fire to be quickly rekindled the next morning without the need for kindling tools. The smoke from the fire not only heated the room, but also served as protection against moisture. It impregnated the leather walls from the inside, making them stiffer and waterproof. Thus, the fire was the true heart of any dwelling of the indigenous inhabitants of the plains. This entire cooking system was the result of centuries of adaptation to harsh living conditions. The use of stones for boiling is an ingenious example of solving a complex engineering problem with the simplest of means. The lack of iron did not prevent them from cooking food properly. Knowledge about the behavior of fire, stone, and water merged together, providing the camp with hot meals. These skills were the foundation on which the entire daily life of the Lakota people was built. What lies behind the beautiful image of the familiar wigwam is a complex climate control system. The traditional Lakota dwelling, known as a teepee, was much more ingeniously designed inside than it appears from the outside. Along the interior walls, from the ground to about human height, an additional layer of dense material called an ozon was stretched. This inner screen created an air gap between the outer wall and the living space. Cold air from the street penetrated under the outer edge of the teepee, heated up in this gap and rose up to the smoke hole. This constant draft worked like a perfect extractor fan, preventing smoke from the central hearth from descending. Thanks to the ozon, the air inside was always clean, and the walls provided reliable protection from drafts. The sleeping areas were located along the edges of the room, directly behind this inner screen. The beds were based on lattices made of flexible willow rods, which raised the sleeper above the cold ground. A thick layer of dry grass was laid on top of the rods, which was regularly changed to maintain cleanliness. In the evening, the interior was lit exclusively by the flame of the central hearth. No additional lamps or candles were used for fire safety reasons. The light reflected off the light-colored inner screen, creating a soft, warm glow around the entire perimeter. In such conditions, people engaged in small tasks, repairing equipment or weaving ropes. Their eyes quickly adjusted to the dim light, allowing them to perform even the most precise and complex tasks. In rainy weather, the smoke vents at the top of the dwelling were tightly closed with external poles. To prevent water from running down the poles into the interior, a special visor was attached at their intersection. It became darker inside, and the smoke dissipated more slowly, but the people remained completely dry. The earthen floor around the hearth was compacted in advance so that it would not turn into mud from accidental drops. The wait for the storm to end was spent in quiet conversation or monotonous craftwork. Order inside was maintained with maniacal thoroughness, as general comfort depended on it. Any debris was immediately swept outside with special brooms made of stiff steppe grasses. A dry floor was a guarantee that mold or rot would not grow in the room. Particular attention was paid to the entrance area, where dirty street shoes were left before proceeding further. The doorway was a piece of thick material stretched over 2 wooden sticks, which could be swung aside. Even decorative elements had a strict functional purpose. Patterns on walls or containers often served as a kind of map or chronicle of important family events. Long strips of fabric suspended from poles helped to visually control airflow. If the strips began to swing heavily, it was a signal that the position of the ozan needed to be adjusted. The engineering genius of the Lakota transformed a simple conical tent into a perfect machine for life on the plains. In winter, the outer perimeter of the dwelling was additionally insulated with a thick layer of dry brushwood and earth. This barrier prevented the soil from freezing at the very base of the wooden frame. The fire in the hearth was kept burning around the clock, requiring huge reserves of wood. Even in the most severe frosts, the temperature inside remained comfortable enough to live in light clothing. The heat was evenly distributed in a circle, leaving no cold corners, which are characteristic of square buildings. This dwelling could be dismantled and prepared for transport in just a few dozen minutes. Despite its mobility, it withstood the tremendous wind loads of the Great Plains. Inside this cone, the centuries-old traditions of the great Lakota people were passed down from generation to generation. Would you like to spend a night in such a traditional shelter, listening to the howling wind? In the next chapter, you will learn how they created super warm clothing to protect themselves from the harshest frosts. The clothing of the Native Americans of the plains was highly functional and surprisingly durable. The main material used to make it was soft, carefully tanned leather. The tanning process was one of the most labor-intensive tasks in the daily life of the camp and required special skills. The surface of the material was scraped for a long time with special bone tools to remove all the tough fibers. After that, the leather was repeatedly stretched and kneaded by hand until it became incredibly soft, resembling modern suede. Tendon threads and bone awls were used to sew basic clothing. The men's costume consisted of long shirts and special leggings that protected the legs when walking through tall grass. Women wore long dresses decorated with fringe, which served to divert water during rain. The fringe broke up the drops, causing them to roll down without soaking the main fabric of the garment. The edges of the garments were often embroidered with intricate geometric patterns using dyed porcupine quills. The famous moccasins served as footwear, their design being ideal for the steppe landscape. Lakota moccasins were sewn with a stiff sole that protected the foot from thorns and sharp stones. The upper part was made of soft material, allowing the foot to breathe and move freely. Winter versions of the shoes were sewn with fur inside, creating an insurmountable barrier to cold air. In addition, dry wormwood grass was often placed inside the moccasin for better thermal insulation. Clothes were constantly being repaired, as they wore out quickly in the steppe. The worn edges of moccasins were re-sewn, and holes were covered with neat patches. Nothing was thrown away just like that. Materials were reused until they were completely destroyed. Old, worn-out clothes were cut into narrow strips, which were then woven into strong ropes. This waste-free approach was the norm and ensured the rational use of all resources. Headwear was primarily practical, not just ceremonial. In winter, thick hoods that fit snugly around the face and neck protected the head. In summer, wide headbands that absorbed sweat provided protection from the scorching sun. Hair was traditionally braided into two tight plaits to prevent it from becoming tangled in strong winds. Special bone combs, carved with great skill, were used to care for the hair. During heavy rains, people took shelter under special capes. These capes were pre-soaked in melted fat, which made the material water repellent. Water simply rolled off the surface, leaving the lower layers of clothing completely dry. This simple waterproofing method was vital during the long rainy seasons on the plains. After the rain, the capes were carefully dried by the fire to prevent mold from forming. The belt was one of the most important pieces of equipment for any member of the tribe. It held the sheath for the stone knife, pouches with flint and tinder, and cases for awls. This ensured that the tools necessary for survival were always at hand. The wide belt also supported the lower back when carrying heavy loads or walking long distances. It was made of the thickest leather and was often richly decorated with patterns. The Lakota people's wardrobe was the benchmark for practicality in the extreme conditions of the Great Plains. Their clothing was light, durable, and able to withstand temperature swings from unbearable heat to bitter cold. Every detail of the costume had its own rationale and had been tested by generations of ancestors. It was genuine survival gear, created from what the surrounding nature provided. The techniques of sewing and processing materials still amaze researchers with their efficiency. Mobility was essential to the success of the Great Plains tribes. A Lakota camp could be dismantled and ready to move to a new location in an incredibly short time. The main means of transport was a structure made of two crossed poles, known as a walushi or travois. These poles were the same ones that served as the frame for the dwelling. Thus, the elements of the house themselves became a means of transporting all the family's possessions. Two long wooden supports were tied together at one end with a strong leather strap. The opposite ends of these poles dragged freely along the ground, forming a kind of sliding runners. Between them, approximately in the middle, a transverse wooden lattice in the shape of an oval or rectangle was attached. It was on this platform that all the belongings were placed, rolled up coverings for the dwelling, food supplies, and tools. All the luggage was securely fastened with long ropes so that it would not fall off while moving over bumps. The sleds were tied to people who pulled them across the endless steppe. The movement of the column was strictly organized and obeyed invisible rules of subordination and safety. Scouts always went ahead to determine the most convenient and safe route. They avoided deep ravines and areas with loose soil where the runners could get stuck. The tracks left by hundreds of wooden poles remained visible in the grass for a long time. The design of the travois was incredibly stable and durable thanks to its flexibility. The long wooden ends springy over uneven terrain, softening the impact on the cargo. The absence of wheels made this system ideal for rough terrain, where a cart would simply break down. When crossing shallow rivers, the travois functioned as a kind of raft. Wood has natural buoyancy, which allowed the cargo to be transported to the other side dry. Packing belongings before migration was done automatically. The heaviest items were placed at the bottom of the cargo platform to lower the center of gravity. Light and fragile items, as well as essential tools, were placed on top. Par-flash envelopes with pemmican were tied in pairs and thrown over the crossbars. The entire loading process resembled a complex puzzle where each item had to occupy its exact place. During the long journey, regular stops were made to rest and check the equipment. The straps of the sleds often rubbed against the shoulders, so bundles of soft grass were placed under them. On the way, people navigated by the sun and the characteristic folds of the terrain. The speed of movement was slow but steady, which allowed them to cover huge distances before sunset. By evening, the column reached the pre-planned location for a new campsite near a body of water. Unpacking the camp was as quick and organized as packing. The poles of the sleds were immediately freed from their load and set upright, forming a new frame. The rolled-up covers were unrolled and stretched over the wooden frame before it got completely dark. Life in the settlement resumed in the new place as if they had never left the old one. This unique transportation system made the Lakota the true masters of the endless plains. The invention of the wagon is a striking example of the rational use of resources. There was no need to cut down trees specifically to make carts or wagons. The frame of the house also served as a means of transport, eliminating the need to carry extra cargo. This dual functionality of objects was the cornerstone of the nomads' philosophy of survival. Extra items simply did not fit into their culture because of the impossibility of transporting them constantly. Winter migrations were particularly difficult and required enormous physical endurance. The runners of the sleds glided well on dense snow, but deep snowdrifts seriously slowed down movement. People walked at the front of the column, trampling a wide path in the snow for those behind them. At campsites, they had to spend a long time clearing the snow from the ground before setting up their dwellings. Despite all the difficulties, mobility remained the key to their survival and successful life. The Lakota transportation system is a triumph of simplicity and engineering minimalism. Their approach to moving cargo across rough terrain was perfected to absolute perfection. The travois proved their unmatched effectiveness over many centuries of use. This invention forever changed the logistics of the nomadic tribes of North America. It allowed them to explore the most remote and harsh corners of the Great Plains. Water was the main resource that determined the migration routes and campsites of the Plains tribes. Finding a clean source of drinking water in the arid steppe was a task of enormous complexity. Experienced scouts searched for water by looking for clusters of moisture-loving plants in the deepest lowlands of ravines. Sometimes they had to dig deep pits in dry riverbeds to reach groundwater. This water seeped through the sand very slowly and was collected with small wooden scoops. The quality of the water found often left much to be desired due to the abundance of silt and fine sand. Therefore, the simplest but most effective methods of natural filtration were used in the camp. The water was passed through layers of clean sand and charcoal wrapped in dense material. This filter trapped large particles of debris, making the liquid clear and suitable for boiling. Boiling with hot stones was a mandatory procedure to prevent stomach upset. Special sealed containers were made for transporting and storing water. Dense organic bags, which were thoroughly cleaned inside, were often used as material. They were rubbed with fat and dried in the sun, after which they became completely waterproof. The neck of such a bag was tightly tied with a leather cord to prevent leakage when walking. Water in such bags remained cool for a long time, even on the hottest summer days. The use of water was strictly regulated, and it was forbidden to waste it on trifles. Rainwater was collected using wide, flat structures for washing and domestic needs. During rainy periods, all available containers in the camp were placed outside to collect precipitation. In winter, the main source of moisture was snow, which was melted in cauldrons by the hearth. Melting snow required a huge amount of firewood, which made winter water very resource-intensive. The attitude towards water bodies was filled with deep practical and philosophical respect. Polluting waste from the camp was never dumped into nearby streams or rivers. The water source was considered a sacred place that provided life for the entire settlement. All members of the community monitored its purity, preventing any attempts to pollute the shoreline. Knowledge of the location of hidden springs on the plain was passed down from generation to generation as the greatest secret. During long journeys, water supplies were calculated with incredible precision. People knew how to get by with a minimum amount of liquid, quenching their thirst with small sips. The use of certain plants that stimulate salivation helped to cope with dry mouth. The movement of the column was always planned so that by evening, they were guaranteed to reach a watering place. A mistake in calculations could lead to catastrophic consequences for the entire group. The work of delivering water from the stream to the camp took up a significant part of the morning. The full containers were very heavy and had to be carried up the slope of the ravine. The water carriers used special paths that had been trodden down over many years at the same stopping places. This monotonous work required good physical fitness and endurance. The availability of water in the teepee was a basic condition for starting to cook food. Water skins were usually stored in the coolest place in the dwelling, away from the fire. They were hung on special wooden tripods to protect them from accidental tipping. Water was always served to guests first, which was the highest sign of respect and hospitality. In dry years, the value of each source increased many times over, causing changes in migration routes. The ability to find water where others could not see it was a sign of a true tracker. Engineering solutions for water filtration are striking in their simplicity and effectiveness. Charcoal from a fire acted as an excellent natural absorbent, soaking up unpleasant odors. This purification method is virtually identical to the basic principles of modern filtration systems. Native Americans intuitively understood the physical properties of porous materials. Their knowledge allowed them to thrive in areas where water was always in short supply. This thriftiness and deep understanding of the ecosystem ensured their survival for centuries. Water was the core around which the entire complex mechanics of camp life revolved. Finding, preserving, and using water properly was the main task of every day. Their experience teaches us to treat natural resources rationally and to respect the power of the elements. The Lakota water supply system is a perfect example of adaptation to the harsh conditions of the Great Plains. As darkness fell, the active working life of the camp gradually came to a halt. giving way to evening traditions. The central element of this time was the hearth fire, around which the whole family gathered. The flames provided not only physical warmth, but also created an atmosphere of security in the vast dark steppe. At this time, equipment damaged during the long working day was carefully repaired. In the dim light, people sewed moccasins, sharpened tools, and wove new ropes from sinews. The evening was a time for the older generation to pass on important information to the younger generation. This knowledge was not recorded in books but existed exclusively in the form of oral narratives. Stories about the origin of the world, the great heroes of the past, and the rules of survival were told to the crackling sound of logs burning. The elders spoke slowly and deliberately, carefully choosing their words so that the meaning would reach every listener. This oral tradition was the main educational institution of the Lakota people for many centuries. In addition to philosophical conversations, the campfire was a place to analyze the past day and plan for the next. Scouts shared their observations about the condition of the grass, the direction of the wind, and signs of approaching bad weather. This data was gathered together to form an overall picture for making important logistical decisions. Tomorrow's routes and places to search for necessary plant resources were discussed. Decisions were made collectively, based on the experience of the wisest and most respected members of the community. The silence of the evening steppe was broken only by quiet voices and the occasional barking in the distance. Musical instruments such as drums and flutes were used mainly during major ceremonies. On ordinary days, the background noise of the camp was very subdued and calm, without unnecessary noise. People respected the peace of their neighbors and tried not to disturb their rest after hard work. The strict discipline that reigned during the day smoothly transitioned into order and respect in the evening. The fire in the hearth gradually died down, leaving behind a thick layer of red-hot coals. Before going to bed, this heat was carefully covered with a layer of ash to preserve it until morning. The smoke vents at the top of the dwelling were slightly covered to preserve the heat accumulated during the evening. Sleeping places were spread out on raised platforms made of twigs, and people wrapped themselves in warm cloaks. The earthen floor around the hearth remained warm long after the flames had died down. The nomad's sleep was light, ready to be interrupted at the slightest sign of danger from outside. The outer perimeter of the camp was guarded in the dark by special sentries who patrolled the area. Any suspicious noise in the tall grass immediately attracted their close attention. The safety of the settlement at night depended entirely on their vigilance and keen hearing. Inside the teepee, people slept, relying on the reliability of this invisible line of defense. Winter evenings were especially long and monotonous due to the short daylight hours. At this time, craft activities inside the warm dwellings reached their peak. Craftsmen created intricate patterns from porcupine quills, requiring tremendous patience and precision. These long hours by the fire brought people together, making them feel like one. The warmth of human interaction warmed them as much as the embers smoldering in the center of the room. Every object in the camp had its own strict function and its own specific place in space. Chaos was the main enemy of survival, so order was maintained on an instinctive level. This philosophy of minimalism and functionality permeated every minute of their daily lives. Respect for nature, for work, and for their elders formed the basis of their strong mentality. Without this inner discipline, existence in the harsh conditions of the plains would have been simply impossible. The story of a day in the life of a Lakota camp is a chronicle of endless struggle and adaptation. It is a story of people who did not try to subjugate nature, but learned to live in harmony with it. Their technology was simple, but their understanding of the world around them was incredibly deep. Every evening around the campfire marked the end of a small cycle of survival in the harsh steppe. Tomorrow the sun would rise again, and this ancient measured rhythm of life would repeat itself. Hundreds of years ago, this perfect mechanism worked flawlessly, ensuring the prosperity of great tribes. Their legacy was preserved not in stone cities, but in the deep wisdom of oral traditions. We can learn a lot from these people: thriftiness, resilience, and the ability to appreciate simple things. A day in a Lakota camp is a lesson in survival that is relevant even in our modern world. This lesson proves that the power of the human spirit can overcome any natural obstacles. We have come all the way from the first rays of the sun over the teepee to the smoldering coals of the Lakota night fire. This harsh but incredibly coordinated way of life demonstrates a true genius for adaptation and survival. What would you like to see in the next videos on this topic? Share your ideas in the comments so we can explore new historical mysteries. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future dives into the daily life of the indigenous peoples of America.